The blood on her hands would not wash clean, no matter how many times Clara Grayson plunged them into the stream, and the deer hide stretched before her seemed to mock every fumbling attempt she made to transform it into something useful. She had been scraping at the thing for 3 hours under the brutal Arizona sun, her father's hunting knife slipping against the membrane with each frustrated stroke, and the stench of the brain solution she had mixed was making her dizzy. Gila City sprawled behind her in the valley, a collection of timber buildings and canvas tents that had sprung up almost overnight when silver was discovered in 1858. And now, in the summer of 1876, it remained a place where people came to start over, to forget, or to simply survive. Clara had arrived 6 months ago with nothing but a carpet bag and determination, fleeing a life in Missouri that had tried to suffocate her beneath petticoats and parlor conversations. Her aunt had died within 3 weeks of Clara's arrival, leaving her a small cabin on the outskirts of town, and very little else. She had learned quickly that sentiment bought nothing in the Arizona territory, that survival required skills she had never needed in her former life. The deer had been a gift from a sympathetic shopkeeper who knew she was struggling, but accepting charity was one thing, and knowing what to do with a whole carcass was another entirely. The hide kept tearing where she scraped too hard, and she could feel tears of frustration building behind her eyes. She had read about tanning in a book she had borrowed from the general store, but the words on the page bore no resemblance to the reality of sinew and fat, and the stubborn refusal of animal skin to cooperate. Her arms ached, her dress was ruined, and she was quite certain she would never get the smell out of her hair. "Mind if I give you some help?" Clara jerked upright, the knife clattering against the rock she had been using as a work surface. A man stood about 10 feet away, his hands raised slightly in a gesture of peace. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin that spoke of years spent outdoors and eyes the color of creek water in spring. He wore dusty denim trousers, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a worn hat that had seen better days. A revolver hung at his hip, but his posture suggested no threat, only a cautious friendliness. "You startled me," Clara said, her heart hammering. She had grown accustomed to the roughness of Gila City, but being alone outside town still made her nervous. "Apologize for that. I was riding past and saw you working. That hide looks like it has been giving you trouble." His voice carried a hint of drawl, slow and measured like he had all the time in the world. Clara glanced down at her handiwork and felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. The hide was a disaster, torn in places, scraped unevenly, and still covered with bits of membrane that should have been removed. "I am doing my best." "Did not mean to imply otherwise," he said, taking a careful step closer. "Tanning is difficult work, takes practice. I have done it since I was a boy, learned from my mother. She knew every trick there was." Something in the way he spoke of his mother, with a gentleness that seemed at odds with the rough country around them, made Clara lower her guard slightly. "I have been trying all morning." The book made it sound straightforward. Books often do. Reality has a way of being more complicated. He tilted his head slightly. "Name is Vincent Reeves. Most people call me Vince. I have a small ranch about 5 miles north of here. Came into town for supplies. Clara Grayson." She hesitated, then added, "I would appreciate help if you are truly offering and not just being polite." A smile flickered across his face, transforming it from merely handsome to something that made her breath catch. "I am offering. May I?" She nodded and stepped back from the hide. Vince moved with an easy grace, settling himself on the ground beside her workspace without any apparent concern for the mess. He examined the hide with a critical eye, running his fingers along the areas she had scraped. "You are using too much pressure," he said. "The blade should glide, not dig. Here, watch." He picked up her knife and demonstrated, his movements fluid and confident. The membrane peeled away in smooth sheets, revealing the pale leather beneath. "See, let the blade do the work. Your arms will thank you." Clara crouched beside him, watching intently. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who had spent a lifetime working with them. There was something mesmerizing about his competence, the sure way he handled the hide and knife as though they were extensions of himself. "Try it," he said, offering her the knife. She took it and attempted to mimic his motion. The blade caught slightly, but with adjustment, she found the rhythm he had shown her. A section of membrane came away cleanly, and she could not suppress a small sound of triumph. "There you go," Vince said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice. "You have the feel of it now." They worked together for the next hour, Vince patiently correcting her technique and explaining the process in a way that made sense. He told her about the importance of the brain solution, about how every animal carried enough brains to tan its own hide, about the smoking process that would come later to make the leather supple and water-resistant. Clara found herself relaxing in his presence, the initial wariness giving way to something approaching comfort. "Why did you stop to help me?" she asked as they worked. "Most people in Gila City keep to themselves." Vince was quiet for a moment, considering. "My mother used to say that kindness cost nothing and was worth everything. I suppose I try to live by that when I can. Besides," he glanced at her with a hint of amusement, "you looked like you might stab that hide out of pure frustration, and that seemed a waste of good leather." Clara laughed despite herself, a real laugh that felt strange after months of merely surviving. "I was close to it, I will admit." "What brings a woman to Gila City working on her own tanning?" he asked. "Seems an unusual situation." She debated how much to tell him, then decided there was little point in hiding the truth. "I needed to start over. Missouri was full of people who had very specific ideas about what my life should look like, and none of those ideas involved what I actually wanted. My aunt lived here and offered to let me come stay with her. She passed shortly after I arrived, but she left me her cabin. I have been learning how to manage on my own since then." "That takes courage," Vince said quietly. "This country is not easy, especially alone." "No," Clara agreed. "But it is mine. That counts for something." They finished scraping the hide as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Vince showed her how to wring it out and stretch it properly, how to stake it so it would dry evenly. By the time they were done, Clara's arms felt like they might fall off, but the hide looked like something that might actually become usable leather. "Thank you," she said as they stood. "I would still be struggling if you had not stopped. Happy to help." Vince settled his hat more firmly on his head. "I come into town every couple of weeks for supplies. If you need help with the next steps, smoking it and such, I could stop by again." There was no presumption in the offer, only genuine willingness to assist, but Clara felt something flutter in her chest at the prospect of seeing him again. "I would like that." He nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Then I will see you soon, Clara Grayson." She watched him mount his horse, a sturdy roan that seemed as patient as its rider, and head north out of the valley. Only when he had disappeared from view did she gather her things and head back toward town, her mind full of creek water eyes and gentle hands that knew exactly how much pressure to use. The next 2 weeks passed slowly. Clara finished the hide with the help of detailed notes Vince had written out for her before he left, instructions so clear even a novice could follow them. She smoked the leather over a fire of cottonwood and willow, watching the color deepen to a rich golden brown. When it was finished, she ran her hands over it in amazement. hardly believing she had helped create something so beautiful. She found herself watching the northern road more than she cared to admit, wondering if Vince would actually return or if his offer had been merely polite words spoken in the moment. Gila City continued its rough existence around her. Miners came and went. Saloon fights broke out with predictable regularity, and the summer heat seemed determined to bake every living thing into submission. Clara took in sewing to earn money, her skill with a needle being one of the few ladylike accomplishments that translated to frontier life, and slowly built a reputation for fine work. On a Thursday afternoon, while she was hemming a dress for the doctor's wife, she heard a knock at her door. Her heart leaped before she could suppress the reaction, and when she opened the door to find Vince standing there with his hat in his hands, her smile was wider than she intended. "Hello," he said. "Thought I would check on how the hide turned out." "Come in," Clara said, stepping back. Her cabin was small but tidy, one room that served as kitchen, workroom, and living space with a sleeping area curtained off at the back. She showed him the finished leather with pride. Vince examined it carefully, then looked at her with approval. "This is excellent work. You did well." "I followed your instructions exactly. Instructions only take you so far. The rest is skill and patience." He set the leather down carefully. "I was wondering if you might let me take you to dinner. There is a restaurant in town, the Silver Creek, that serves decent food." "As a thank you for letting me help." Clara blinked at the backwards logic. "Should I not be thanking you?" "Perhaps we can thank each other," he said, and there was something in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. She knew what agreeing meant, knew that dinner with a man was a declaration of sorts in a town like Gila City where everyone watched everyone else. But she found she did not care about the gossip, not when Vince was looking at her like she was something precious. "I would like that very much," she said softly. The Silver Creek restaurant was owned by a Chinese couple who had come to Gila City during the Silver Rush and stayed when they realized feeding miners was more reliable than mining itself. The food was a curious blend of American and Chinese cooking, and the atmosphere was considerably more refined than the saloons that dominated the town. Vince held Clara's chair for her, a gesture that reminded her of her old life but felt different coming from him, less about propriety and more about genuine care. Over plates of roasted chicken and vegetables, they talked. Vince told her about his ranch, how he had come to Arizona Territory 5 years ago after his mother died, and his father followed her 6 months later, both taken by fever. He had wanted a fresh start somewhere he could build something of his own, and the land north of Gila City had called to him. He ran cattle, a small operation that he managed alone except during Roundup when he hired temporary help. "It is not much," he admitted, "but it is mine. I built the house with my own hands, dug the well, broke the horses. Some days it feels like the work will never end, but then I watch the sun rise over the mountains and remember why I stayed." Clara found herself captivated by the way he spoke, by the quiet passion beneath his words. "It sounds beautiful." "It is, lonely sometimes, but beautiful." He met her eyes. "What about you? What did you want that Missouri could not give you?" She considered the question, trying to put into words the restlessness that had driven her west. "Freedom, I suppose. The chance to make my own choices, even if they were mistakes. In Missouri, every decision was made for me. What I would wear, where I would go, who I would marry. There was a man, a banker's son, who my family expected me to accept. He was perfectly suitable in every way that did not matter. And the ways that did matter, he made me feel like I was disappearing. Like if I married him, Clara Grayson would cease to exist and become just another decoration in his house." She traced patterns on the tablecloth. "So I left." My aunt had written for years about the territory, about how different it was, and when she offered me a place, I took it even though everyone said I was insane. "Are you sorry you came?" Vince asked quietly. Clara thought about the past 6 months, the hardship and struggle and loneliness. Then she thought about the satisfaction of finishing that hide, of earning her own money, of sitting across from a man who looked at her like she was complete as she was. "No," she said. "I am not sorry at all." They lingered over coffee as evening fell, talking until the restaurant owner began giving them pointed looks. Vince walked her home through streets lit by lamplight and moonbeams, Gila City settling into its night rhythms. At her door he paused. "May I see you again?" he asked. "Yes," Clara said simply. He smiled, and her heart did something complicated in her chest. "Sunday, I could show you the ranch if you would like to see it." "I would like that very much." He bid her good night with a tip of his hat, and Clara went inside feeling like she was floating. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat racing, and allowed herself to admit what she had been avoiding for 2 weeks. She was falling for Vince Reeves, falling hard and fast in a way that should have terrified her, but instead felt like coming home. Sunday dawned clear and hot. The Arizona sky that brilliant blue that seemed to exist nowhere else on Earth. Vince arrived at mid-morning with a gentle mare for Clara to ride, and they headed north out of Gila City into country that grew more rugged and beautiful with every mile. The land here was painted in shades of red and gold, dotted with sage and mesquite, with mountains rising purple in the distance. "How much farther?" Clara asked, adjusting to the rhythm of riding. It had been years since she had been on a horse, but the skill came back gradually. "Just over the next rise," Vince said. "The ranch sits in a valley with a creek running through it. Not much water this time of year, but enough for the cattle and horses." They crested the hill, and Clara caught her breath. The valley spread before them, a small house of weathered timber standing beside a barn and several corrals. Cattle grazed in the distance, and the thin ribbon of the creek glinted in the sunlight. It was simple and rough, but there was something beautiful about it, something solid and real. "It is wonderful," she said, and meant it. Pride flickered across Vince's face. "Let me show you around." He gave her a tour of the property, showing her the house he had built log by log, the barn where he kept his horses, the chicken coop that provided eggs. The house was spare but clean, with furniture he had made himself and a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. It was clearly the home of a man living alone, functional rather than comfortable, but Clara could see the potential in it. "I know it is not much," Vince said, standing in the main room with his hat in his hands. "A woman would probably want to change everything." "I think it is honest," Clara said, running her hand along the smooth wood of the table. "It shows who you are." They had lunch on the porch, bread and cheese and apples that Vince had packed, and Clara felt a peace settle over her that she had not experienced since leaving Missouri. Being here felt right in a way she could not entirely explain. "Can I ask you something?" Vince said as they sat watching the valley. "Of course." "That man in Missouri, the banker's son, did you love him?" Clara considered the question. "No, I tried to convince myself I might learn to, but that was a lie. There was nothing there, no spark, no connection. Being with him felt like drowning in shallow water." "And now," Vince asked softly, "what does now feel like?" She turned to look at him, at the vulnerability in his eyes that he was trying to hide. "Like breathing," she said honestly, "like I can finally breathe." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "I have been alone a long time, Clara. Told myself I liked it that way, that I did not need anyone. Then you showed up by that creek, covered in blood and brains and cursing at a deerhide, and something in me woke up. I have not been able to stop thinking about you." Clara felt tears sting her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. I have been watching for you every day. Told myself I was being foolish, that one afternoon helping with tanning did not mean anything. But my heart did not listen. "What is your heart saying now?" he asked. She squeezed his hand. "That this is where I am supposed to be." Vince stood, pulling her gently to her feet, and cupped her face in his hands. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," she whispered, and then his lips were on hers, soft and sure and perfect. She melted against him, her arms going around his neck, and let herself fall completely into the kiss. It tasted like possibility and promise, like everything she had been searching for without knowing what she needed. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Vince rested his forehead against hers. "Stay for supper. I can take you back after, but I am not ready to let you go yet." "Neither am I," Clara admitted. They spent the afternoon together, and Clara helped Vince with evening chores. She gathered eggs while he tended the horses, and they worked in comfortable silence broken by occasional conversation. There was something deeply intimate about the domestic simplicity of it, about moving through tasks together like they had done so 1,000 times before. Vince cooked supper, a simple meal of beans and salt pork and cornbread, and they ate as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. He told her stories about his childhood in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk and his mother teaching him to read by lamplight. Clara shared memories of Missouri, the good ones about her father before he died and the library where she had spent hours escaping into books. "I should get you back," Vince said reluctantly as full darkness fell. "Do not want people talking." "Let them talk," Clara said, but she rose anyway. She knew how precarious her position was in Gila City, how quickly reputation could be destroyed. The ride back was slower, neither of them eager to end the day. At her cabin door, Vince kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, until Clara felt like she might catch fire from the wanting that coursed through her. "I am falling in love with you," he said against her lips. "Might have already fallen, wanted you to know." "I love you too," Clara said, and the words felt like freedom. "I think I have since you showed me how to scrape that hide." He laughed, the sound full of joy. "Only you would fall in love over animal brains and sharp knives." "It was the gentleness," she said seriously. "The way you were so patient, so kind. That is when I knew." They stood holding each other under the stars, and Clara felt her future shifting, rearranging itself into something she had never dared imagine. When Vince finally left, she went inside and lay awake for hours, her heart too full for sleep. The courtship that followed was the talk of Gila City. Vince came to town every few days, always finding excuses to stop by Clara's cabin. He brought her things from his ranch, fresh eggs and vegetables from his garden, once a bouquet of wildflowers that made her cry. She cooked for him, using skills she had learned as a girl but now employed with entirely different motivation. They took walks along the creek where they had first met, and Vince taught her to shoot, his arms around her as he helped her aim at tin cans set on fence posts. "You should know how to protect yourself," he said, "living alone like you do." Clara had never held a gun before coming west, but she learned quickly under Vince's patient instruction. The revolver's kick surprised her at first, but she adjusted, and soon she was hitting targets with reasonable accuracy. "You are a natural," Vince said with approval. "A few more sessions and you will be dangerous." "Maybe I already am," Clara teased, and he pulled her close and kissed her breathless. 3 months after that first meeting by the creek, Vince invited Clara to the ranch for Sunday dinner. She could tell from his nervousness that something was different, that this visit meant more than the others. She wore her best dress, the green one that brought out her eyes, and took extra care with her hair. When she arrived, she found the house transformed. Vince had cleaned until everything shone, had picked more wildflowers and put them in jars on the table and windowsills. He had cooked an elaborate meal, or attempted to, and the evidence of his efforts was both touching and slightly comical. "I might have gotten ambitious," he admitted, surveying the chaos of the kitchen. "There may have been a small fire." Clara laughed and rolled up her sleeves. "Show me what you have done so far." They cooked together, salvaging Vince's attempts and adding what was needed, working side by side in the small kitchen with an ease that spoke of perfect compatibility. When they finally sat down to eat, the food was good, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. After the meal, Vince took her hand and led her outside. The sun was setting, painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson, and the beauty of it stole her breath. "I have been thinking," Vince said, and she could hear the nervousness in his voice. "About the future, about what I want." "What do you want?" Clara asked softly. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You. Every day, every night, for the rest of my life. I want to wake up next to you and fall asleep holding you. I want to build a life together, to fill this house with love and maybe children someday. I want everything, Clara, if you will have me." He dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band with a small turquoise stone. "It is not fancy," he said, "but turquoise is supposed to bring protection and luck. I want you protected and lucky in mine." "Clara Grayson, will you marry me?" She was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she nodded. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed through her tears. When he set her down, he slid the ring onto her finger, and Clara marveled at how right it looked there, how perfect it felt. "I love you," she said, framing his face with her hands. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too," he said. "From the moment you looked at me like you wanted to stab that deerhide in frustration. You were so fierce and determined and beautiful, and I was lost." They held each other as night fell over the valley, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Clara had come to Arizona territory looking for freedom and found love instead, or perhaps found that they were the same thing after all. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in early November, when the brutal summer heat had finally broken. They were married by the circuit preacher in the small church that served Gila City and the surrounding area. Clara wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Vince had given her, cream-colored calico with lace at the collar and cuffs. Vince wore his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed and his boots polished until they gleamed. The whole town turned out, curious about the Eastern woman who had captured the heart of the solitary rancher. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when Vince kissed his bride, the small church erupted in cheers and applause. They held a reception at the Silver Creek restaurant, the Chinese owners going all out with food and decorations. Clara danced with her new husband, feeling like she was floating, and accepted congratulations from people who had become friends over the past months. The doctor's wife hugged her tightly and whispered, "You deserve this happiness." The shopkeeper who had given her the deer shook Vince's hand and told him he was a lucky man. As evening fell, they rode out to the ranch together, Clara seated in front of Vince on his horse, his arms around her. Under the stars, they began their married life, and Clara felt a completeness she had never known was possible. The first year of marriage was an adjustment. Clara moved her few possessions to the ranch and set about making the house a home. She added curtains to the windows, braided rugs for the floors, and coaxed flowers to grow in a garden by the porch. Vince built her a proper kitchen table and shelves for the books she had accumulated. They worked the ranch together, Clara learning the rhythms of cattle and horses, of planting and harvest, of the endless cycle of tasks that made up frontier life. It was not always easy. The isolation sometimes pressed on Clara, used to town life even in a place as small as Gila City. The work was unrelenting, and there were days when she fell into bed exhausted beyond measure. But Vince was always there, patient and supportive, helping her learn and never making her feel inadequate when she struggled. Winter brought challenges neither had anticipated. A hard freeze killed several cattle, and they worked desperately to save the rest. Clara learned to break ice on the water troughs, to herd cattle into sheltered areas, to cook with limited supplies when they were snowed in for days. Through it all, their love sustained them, growing deeper with every shared hardship. Spring arrived like a benediction, bringing warmth and new life to the valley. Clara discovered she was pregnant in April, and the joy on Vince's face when she told him made her cry happy tears. "A baby," he said wonderingly, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Clara asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said, kissing her deeply. "You have given me everything, Clara. Everything I ever wanted and things I did not know I needed." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer heat. Vince became impossibly protective, trying to prevent Clara from doing any work, until she finally had to put her foot down and remind him she was pregnant, not made of glass. They compromised, with Clara doing lighter tasks and Vince hiring temporary help for the heavier ranch work. They spent evenings on the porch, Vince's hand on Clara's growing belly, feeling their child move and kick. They talked about names and possibilities, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. Clara had never felt more content, more complete, than in those quiet moments with her husband, awaiting the arrival of their first child. The baby came in January of 1878, during a cold snap that left frost on the windows. Clara's labor lasted 14 hours, attended by the midwife from Gila City, who had ridden out despite the weather. Vince paced the porch, too nervous to be inside, until the midwife called him in to meet his son. Thomas Vincent Reeves was red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair in his father's eyes. Vince held him with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked from his son to his wife. "He is perfect," Vince said. "Clara, he is absolutely perfect." "He has your stubbornness," Clara said tiredly from the bed. "Took his time arriving." Vince sat beside her, the baby cradled carefully in his arms. "Thank you," he said softly. "For him, for choosing me for this life. I never dreamed I could be this happy." "Neither did I," Clara admitted, reaching up to stroke Thomas's soft cheek. "All those years in Missouri trying to be what everyone expected, and I was so miserable. Now look at us." They sat together as night fell, a family now complete and whole. Thomas nursed hungrily, and Clara marveled at the fierce love that overwhelmed her, at how this tiny person had become the center of her universe in an instant. The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas grew from baby to toddler to boy, running wild on the ranch and following his father everywhere. Clara gave birth to twin girls when Thomas was 3, Rebecca and Rose, identical and inseparable. The house rang with laughter and chaos, and though Clara sometimes felt overwhelmed, she would not have traded it for anything. Vince proved to be a wonderful father, patient and loving, teaching his children about the land and animals with the same gentle competence he had shown Clara with that first deerhide. He built them toys and told them stories, and carried them on his shoulders while checking fence lines. Clara watched him with their children and fell in love with him all over again, deeper each time. The ranch prospered as the years passed. Vince's reputation for quality cattle grew, and buyers came from as far as Tucson to purchase his stock. Clara started breeding chickens, developing a flock that produced eggs and meat for sale in Gila City. Together they built something solid, something that would last. When Thomas was 8, Clara began teaching him and the twins to read, using the books she had brought from Missouri and new ones ordered from catalogs. The children were bright and curious, full of questions about everything. Rebecca wanted to know how the cattle found water, Rose was fascinated by the chickens, and Thomas absorbed everything his father taught him about ranching with single-minded focus. "He will be a fine rancher someday," Vince said, watching Thomas help mend a fence with serious concentration. "Better than me, probably." "He has a good teacher," Clara said, leaning against her husband's side. They were sitting on the porch in the evening cool, watching their children play in the yard. Rebecca was attempting to teach Rose to cartwheel, with mixed results, and Thomas was showing them both the proper way to do it. Clara rested her head on Vince's shoulder, feeling the familiar contentment that came from being exactly where she belonged. "Did you ever imagine it would be like this?" Vince asked. "When you were standing by that creek, covered in blood and cursing at a deerhide," Clara laughed. "Not even remotely. I was just trying to survive, to prove I could make it on my own. I certainly did not expect a handsome cowboy to appear and change everything." "Best decision I ever made, stopping to help you," Vince said, kissing the top of her head. "Though I will admit I had ulterior motives." "Oh," Clara looked up at him with mock surprise. "And what might those have been?" "Well, you were beautiful even covered in brain solution and frustration. And there was something about the way you refused to give up, kept trying even though you were clearly miserable, that impressed me. I wanted to know you, wanted to understand what drove you. And now that you know. Now I love you more than the day I married you, which I did not think was possible." He cupped her face gently. "You gave me a family, Clara. You took this lonely house and filled it with love. I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Good," Clara said, kissing him softly. "Because you are stuck with me." "Happily stuck," he agreed. More years passed, marked by the slow turning of seasons and the steady growth of children. Thomas became a teenager, tall and serious, with his father's work ethic and his mother's determination. The twins were 10, still identical but developing distinct personalities. Rebecca was bold and adventurous, always first to try new things, while Rose was quieter, more thoughtful, with a gift for gentling animals. Clara turned 35, then 40, hardly able to believe how quickly time passed. Her hair showed threads of gray, and her hands bore the calluses and scars of years of ranch work, but she had never felt more beautiful because of the way Vince still looked at her, with the same love and desire he had shown that first day. The ranch continued to grow. They built a larger barn, expanded the house to give the children their own rooms, and added more cattle. Gila City changed around them, becoming less wild and more settled as the territory moved toward statehood. The rough edges smoothed and civilization crept in, bringing schools and churches and regular law. When Thomas was 17, he met a girl in Gila City, the daughter of the new banker. Her name was Sarah, and she was sweet and sensible with a good head on her shoulders. Clara watched her son fall in love and remembered her own first meeting with Vince, the electric feeling of connection that changed everything. "Is this what it was like for you?" Thomas asked her one day, helping with the horses while Sarah visited. "When you met Pa?" "Yes," Clara said honestly. "Exactly like that. Like suddenly everything made sense." "I want to marry her," Thomas said. "I know I am young, but I know what I want." "Then you should tell her," Clara said. "Life is too short to wait when you have found the right person." Thomas proposed to Sarah that autumn, and they were married the following spring in a ceremony that brought back memories of Clara's own wedding. She cried watching her son pledge his life to the woman he loved, and Vince held her hand tightly, both of them aware of how quickly time had passed. Thomas and Sarah built a house on the north edge of the ranch, wanting to be close, but also establish their own space. They worked the ranch with Vince, the three of them forming an efficient team. Sarah proved to be a hard worker, not afraid of the demands of ranch life, and Clara was grateful her son had chosen so well. The twins were 15 when a traveling teacher came through Gila City, a young woman from Boston who had come west for adventure. She stayed at the ranch for a week, boarding in exchange for giving the girls lessons, and Clara watched Rebecca's interest in the world beyond the ranch blossom. Rose remained content with ranch life, but Rebecca wanted more, wanted to see what existed past the Arizona territory. "Let her go," Vince advised when Clara worried. "She needs to find her own path, like you did." So when Rebecca turned 18 and announced she wanted to attend normal school in Phoenix, they let her go, though Clara cried for days. Rose stayed, having no interest in leaving, and began helping more with the ranch work. She had inherited her father's way with animals, and under her care, they expanded into horse breeding. Clara was 48 when she became a grandmother for the first time. Thomas and Sarah's son was born on a warm May morning, and holding him brought back memories of Thomas as a baby, of those early days learning to be a mother. They named him Vince after his grandfather, and the older Vince was ridiculously proud, carrying the baby everywhere and boring anyone who would listen with stories about his genius grandson. More grandchildren followed. Thomas and Sarah had 3 children in quick succession, keeping the ranch lively and loud. Rebecca returned from Phoenix with a teaching certificate and a husband, a lawyer named James who had fallen for her intelligence and spirit. They settled in Gila City, and Rebecca opened a school, determined to give children the education she had craved. Rose married at 22, choosing a neighboring rancher named Ben who shared her love of horses and quiet living. Clara and Vince entered their 50s surrounded by family, their legacy spreading through the valley they had made their own. The ranch was thriving, managed now by Thomas with help from Vince, who found himself able to step back and enjoy the fruits of decades of labor. "We did well," Vince said one evening. They were sitting on the porch in the same spot where they had spent countless evenings over the years. The sun was setting in a blaze of crimson and gold, painting the valley in glorious color. "Look at everything we built." Clara surveyed the ranch, seeing not just the buildings and corrals and cattle, but the life they had created. Children and grandchildren, love and laughter, the solid foundation of decades spent working side by side. "We did very well," she agreed. "You ever regret it?" Vince asked. "Leaving Missouri, choosing this hard life?" "Never," Clara said firmly. "Not for a single moment. This is exactly where I was meant to be." He took her hand, his touch still sending warmth through her after all these years. "I love you, Clara Reeves. Loved you when you were young and covered in blood. Love you now with gray in your hair and laugh lines around your eyes. Will love you when we are both old and bent and slow." "I love you too," Clara said, leaning into his embrace. "Thank you for stopping that day, for teaching me how to tan that hide. Thank you for seeing me, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful life." "Thank you for saying yes," Vince replied, "for taking a chance on a lonely cowboy with a rough ranch and big dreams." They sat in comfortable silence as full darkness fell, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting. The Arizona night wrapped around them, warm and familiar, filled with the sounds of the ranch settling for sleep. In the house behind them, grandchildren were being put to bed, their voices calling out good nights. Down the hill, Lights glowed in Thomas's house, and further in the valley, Rose and Ben's home showed welcoming windows. It was everything Clara had never known she wanted, everything Vince had dreamed of during lonely years before she arrived. Years continued to pass with gentle inevitability. Clara turned 60, then Vince did the same. They slowed down, letting Thomas take over more of the ranch operations, but neither could quite stop working entirely. Clara still tended her chickens and garden, still cooked Sunday dinners that brought the entire family together. Vince still rode out to check cattle, still mended fence and broke horses, though he moved more carefully now, his joints protesting the cold mornings. Their grandchildren grew, and great-grandchildren began arriving. The ranch had been in the family for over 40 years, a legacy that would continue through generations. Thomas proved to be an excellent steward, expanding operations while respecting the foundation his parents had built. Rebecca's school flourished, educating children throughout the valley. Rose's horse breeding program gained renown throughout the territory, and now the new state of Arizona, drawing buyers from far and wide. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the house and yard, their voices rising in laughter and conversation. A photographer had been hired to capture the occasion, and Clara stood next to Vince, surrounded by the family they had created, marveling at the passage of time. 40 years, Vince said, holding her close. Feels like yesterday and a lifetime all at once. Best 40 years of my life, Clara said, though I could do without the gray hair and creaky knees. He laughed, the sound still making her heart flutter. You are as beautiful to me now as you were at 25, covered in blood and glaring at a deerhide like it had personally offended you. I was very offended, Clara said with dignity. That hide was being extremely difficult. Lucky for me, Vince said, and kissed her to the cheers and applause of their family. They cut into an enormous cake that Sarah had baked, and speeches were made, toasts offered. Thomas spoke about what his parents had taught him about love and partnership, about working together and never giving up. Rebecca talked about her mother's courage in leaving everything familiar to build a new life. Rose simply said that her parents showed her what real love looked like, and she was grateful every day for their example. Clara cried through most of it, happy tears that Vince gently wiped away. When it was their turn to speak, he kept it simple. 40 years ago, I married the woman of my dreams. She was brave and beautiful and stubborn, and she took a chance on a lonely cowboy with more hope than sense. Every day since has been a gift. Every day I wake up next to her is a blessing I never take for granted. Clara, you made me the luckiest man alive, and I love you more now than I thought possible. Clara could barely speak through her tears, but she managed. I love you too. Thank you for stopping to help a stubborn woman who had no idea what she was doing. Thank you for being patient and kind and loving. Thank you for this life, this family, this love. You are everything I never knew I needed. The party continued late into the night, but eventually people began drifting home, calling out goodbyes and promises to visit soon. Clara and Vince stood on the porch, waving until the last wagon disappeared, then stood together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the ranch around them. Come to bed, Vince said softly. I want to hold my wife. They went inside the house they had shared for 40 years, climbed into the bed they had slept in together for longer than Clara had lived in Missouri. Vince pulled her close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Do you remember what I said that first day? Vince asked. About my mother believing kindness cost nothing and was worth everything. I remember, Clara said. She was right. Stopping to help you was the best decision I ever made. The kindness I showed you that day came back to me 1,000-fold. You are my everything, Clara. And you are mine, she said softly. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms. Two people who had found love in the Arizona territory, who had built a life together through hard work and determination, an unwavering commitment to each other. Outside, the ranch they had built together stretched under the stars, testament to what they had created, to the legacy they would leave behind. The years that followed were gentler, slower. Clara and Vince became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family, their wisdom sought on matters both practical and personal. They spent their days in comfortable routine, still working but at their own pace, still vital but aware of their mortality. When Clara was 72, she fell ill with pneumonia during a harsh winter. For weeks, she battled fever and weakness while Vince sat at her bedside, refusing to leave. Their children took turns caring for her, but it was Vince's presence that pulled her through, his voice reading to her, his hand holding hers, his love sustaining her when her body wanted to give up. When she finally recovered, thin and weak but alive, the first thing she said was, "You are not getting rid of me that easily." Vince, who had aged years in those weeks of illness, laughed through his tears. "Would not dream of it. We have at least another 40 years together." "At least," Clara agreed. They had 10 more years, years of watching great-grandchildren grow, of celebrating more weddings and births, of seeing the ranch continue to prosper under Thomas's care. They took walks together every evening, moving slowly but steadily, still holding hands after more than half a century together. On a warm spring evening in 1928, exactly 50 years after their son Thomas was born, Vince and Clara sat on their porch watching the sunset. It had been a good day, full of family and laughter, and they were pleasantly tired. "I've had a good life," Vince said quietly, "better than I ever imagined possible." "So have I," Clara said. "Thank you for it. Thank you for loving me, for building this with me. Thank you for saying yes that day I proposed. Thank you for every day since." He squeezed her hand gently. "I love you, Clara Reeves." "I love you too," she said. "Always have, always will." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The valley spread before them, unchanged in its essential beauty, but transformed by the life they had built there. The ranch bustled with activity even as evening fell, the sounds of family and animals and home filling the air. Vince passed away peacefully in his sleep that night, Clara's hand in his, a smile on his face. He was 84 years old, and he had lived every day of his adult life loving the woman beside him. Clara grieved deeply, but without bitterness. She had been granted 52 years with the man she loved, had built a life with him that exceeded her wildest dreams. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by family, still sharp and engaged with the world. She spent her final years writing down the story of her life, of coming west and meeting a kind cowboy who stopped to help her with a deerhide, of how that single act of kindness had changed everything. When Clara Reeves died at 87, peacefully in her sleep with grandchildren keeping vigil, she was laid to rest beside her husband on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstones were simple, bearing their names and dates and a single inscription chosen by their children. They built a legacy of love. The ranch continued through their descendants, the Reeves name becoming synonymous with quality cattle and fine horses throughout Arizona. But more than that, they left a legacy of partnership, of choosing love even when it was not easy, of building something lasting through commitment and hard work, and unwavering devotion to each other. In Gila City, now a thriving small city. Old-timers still told the story of Clara Grayson, the Eastern woman who came west alone, and Vincent Reeves, the cowboy who stopped to help her with a deer hide and found his soulmate. It became a legend of sorts, a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in life come disguised as simple kindness, that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, and that choosing courage and openness can lead to everything you never knew you needed. The valley where they had lived and loved and raised their family remained beautiful, the creek still running where they had first met, and on quiet evenings when the light was right, it was easy to imagine two figures sitting on the old porch, holding hands and watching the sunset, their love echoing through the years, eternal and unbreakable, a testament to what two people could build when they chose each other completely.